Well, just briefly coming away from that subject, I want to talk now about 3.8 million people who are the excluded. This is a huge group of people who were excluded from furlough, excluded from any form of extra benefit during the COVID years. And, their stories are often absolutely devastating through no fault of their own. Lost jobs, lost businesses, and so on. And the government was not there to help them. I read a lot about the excluded online, but rarely see them mentioned in the newspapers. So I want to give Tim now an opportunity to tell us his story. So Tim Pravda, who is somebody who has suffered in this way as one of the excluded, and also Jennifer Griffiths, who's head of Excluded UK, are joining me on the line. Tim, first of all, hello.
Hello, good afternoon, Carol.
Hi.
Thank you for having us on.
Well, tell me your story, Tim, your particular story.
I'm basically a PAYE freelancer in live events, so probably one of about 350,000. We're basically on short-term contracts.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the beginning of the pandemic and Rishi Sunak said to you, I say this, you're not being forgotten, not being left behind, we're all in this together. I thought, oh, we're fine, we're going to get some support here because we was the first industry to close. And as everyone knows, we was the last industry to open again. And time again, we was going through and we said, here's the solutions. We're taxed at source. And he still turned around and called us fraud risks. And the industry was literally put on its knees. And he's just never, ever come up and said, we'll use your tax records when he was supporting everyone else.
So you'd worked in the events industry for a long time, hadn't you, Tim?
Yeah, I've been in about 12, 13 years, but longer than that in the festival industry, yes.
And in the festival industry, I mean, it's just like in the media industry, there are an awful lot of people who work on short-term contracts. And obviously in the festival industry, that's standard because festivals only last for a certain amount of time and you're there to put them up and go through it and then pull them down again and then you move on to the next contract. That's the nature of the industry. So, and obviously you've paid your taxes. So why weren't you, in your particular circumstances, accepted? What were they saying that you weren't? Why weren't you accepted for some form of COVID support?
In the pandemic, I literally wrote over probably 3,000 emails and letters to the Treasury, and they turned around and says, "You can be furloughed," even though my unions like Beck2 and everyone else was saying, "No, we are freelance and we're not employed by anybody on a full-time basis. As soon as we go into a festival, we're contracted, and the minute we leave, we're left. That's it. So they basically said we're tax risks.
So they were saying it's up to your employer, and they should claim your furlough, and the employer isn't an employer in the traditional sense. Because they're such short-term contracts. Thanks, Tim, for... what has happened to you as a result of all of that?
I had to move back in with my parents, obviously, because I was not entitled to either furlough or the self-employment income support scheme. Yeah. So it was basically we left with absolutely nothing throughout the whole pandemic.
And that was for years, wasn't it, in that industry?
Yeah, literally, yeah. So he's literally just left shafted by Rishi Sunak and his government. And it's scandalous how they can just leave millions of people high and dry in a pandemic.
Literally millions.
We're going to save the NHS, protect lives, where it's actually cost 37 lives to date.
Tim, I'm going to talk to Jennifer now, who's head of Excluded UK, to get a broader picture. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Carol. Thank you for this opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Well, I do read a lot about it online. I read a lot about what anybody sends to me. And, it's nearly 4 million people who were involved in this, in being excluded from any sort of COVID benefits as such, just to maintain an income. Can you just tell me broadly who those groups of people were?
Yeah, certainly. And I'm really pleased that you didn't concentrate on small businesses and directors, which is the misconception that we're trying to put right, because there were people that were newly self-employed, like Tim, PAYE freelancers, the new starters, people denied furlough, those made redundant before the 19th of March 2020, those in maternity, parental or adoption leave. We had war veterans that drawn down their pension to set up like a self-employed business, and that was sort of counted as income rather than their own pension that obviously they've already paid taxes on the wages.
Yeah.
Bereavement allowance, carers allowance, students, and then we've got the WASPy 1950s women. That there's a double whammy. Not only have they got the issues with the pensions, but then they're excluded on top of that. So we really love our WASPies and look after them as best we can. But yeah, the amount of people. I mean, 3.8 million people is 10% of the working population,
Yeah.
and it's equivalent of just over the population of Wales. So
yes, it is. So the result of all of this, obviously, as Tim said, he lost his job, he lost his home, he had to move back in with his parents, and he was in his 40s. Is this a common tale, Jennifer?
Yeah, definitely. We've got a member welfare team that look after all of our members, and the stories that we're told, there's people, they've sold houses, they've sold their cars, some living in their cars because they have to sell their houses, or they've sold family heirlooms, wedding rings, all other personal and sentimental jewelry. They've obviously not been given support, some not, well, it's just, sorry, I don't want to get emotional, but to be called fraudsters on top of not receiving the support, and then you've got people like Michael Fabricant, MP for Lichfield, denying the suicides. Now, one of those that took their own life was one of my best friends, and her mother read me her suicide note, which said, "I feel hopeless, helpless and worthless, and I don't want to live in a world where people think it's okay to do this." And that is very personal to me, but I'm very passionate about mental health. And we've just had some dreadful stories. I wrote to Nadine Dorries when she was Minister for Health. She ignored my letter. 3 months later, I wrote to Gillian Keegan. There's an open letter on our website. And in that details a 9-year-old little boy who both parents were excluded. They had to downsize their house, obviously move somewhere different. He tried to take his own life twice. And when he went to CAMHS, they said that because of austerity cuts, they have a criteria. And in that particular trust, you had to have tried to take your life 3 times. There was a little girl in another area. She was 11 at the time, and their area was 5 times. So not only are they meeting this financial issue, there's a huge mental health crisis as well.
Jennifer, really, I mean, really we should devote an hour to this, and I'm sorry that we don't have that, but have you spoken to the Labour Party? Obviously, you're having absolutely no truck with the Conservatives, but do you think that there would be any advance now, or is it too late?
Yeah, we were part of the largest APPG in history, the Gaps in Support, and there was over 260, I think it was 263, Tim will put me right, but 263 cross-party MPs, including Conservative MPs and obviously Labour MPs, and they were very supportive. For whatever reason, we're still trying to find out. That APP sort of disappeared in July. I think the last thing we heard of it was October 22.
Well, Jennifer, I'm sorry I have to move on. I really am. But, I will pass on your details and the subject to perhaps some of my colleagues on LBC, where they can go into this in more detail, because it's obviously, has many tentacles to this and none of them good. But thank you, Jennifer. And thank you very much, Tim, for telling me your story. And thank you, Jennifer, for telling us more about this. If you've been affected by anything that we've just spoken about, indeed with spiking as well, I'm going to give you the Samaritans number, which is 116123. Jennifer was talking about suicide attempts. Samaritans number 116123.